At 2:13 a.m., in an ice storm up in the Blue Ridge, Tom Bennett heard something scraping right outside his front door. He opened it and froze. Soaked to the bone, a wild bobcat was dragging a bright blue plastic basket across his porch, and its eyes weren't frantic. They were certain, like it had come to deliver a message. Tom looked inside and his knees nearly gave out. His missing brother's wedding ring, engraved LB, and a blood-smeared note that read, "He's alive. Don't call them first. Follow her." Then, from deep in the dark woods, a gunshot cracked the night. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. At 2:13 in the morning, the kind of hour when the whole world feels held together by nothing but darkness and habit, Tom Bennett woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not the steady drum of sleet on the roof, not the familiar groan of pine branches bending under ice. This was lower, closer, an uneven scrape that rose and fell like something heavy being pulled across wood. For a moment he lay still, listening, the way he'd been trained to listen back when he worked wildland fire, eyes open in the dark, breath quiet, mind sorting noises into safe and unsafe. The heater clicked, then went silent. Outside, the wind shoved at the porch railing and rattled the chimes his late mother had hung there years ago. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and damp cedar, even inside. Then the scraping came again. A pause. Another scrape, right at his front door. Tom swung his feet onto the floorboards. They were cold enough to sting through his socks. He didn't turn on the overhead light. He never did at night. Instead, he moved by the dull gray glow slipping through the curtains from the security light, the kind homeowners install for home protection and forget until it throws a hard shadow across the yard. He reached for the old flashlight on the kitchen counter, the one with the dented aluminum body and a switch that sometimes stuck. His hand found it by memory. His other hand brushed the edge of a weathered first aid kit, red plastic, faded by summers and time. He hadn't opened it in months. He hadn't needed to. Out here, he kept to himself. The scraping stopped. Silence took its place so completely it made his ears ring. Tom stepped to the window beside the door and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the porch. The light washed everything in a stark white glare. The wet wooden planks, the rocking chair he never sat in, the doormat turned slightly crooked from the wind. And there, half in shadow, half in that harsh light, was movement. At first, his brain refused to name it, a low, muscular shape mottled with mud and rain. A tail close to the ground, ears with dark tufts that cut a sharp silhouette when the wind lifted them. A bobcat. It wasn't supposed to be there, not this close, not on his porch, not in a storm that iced the branches and turned the gravel drive into a slick ribbon. Bobcats came through the woods behind his cabin. Sometimes he'd seen tracks, heard a scream in the distance that could raise the hair on a man's neck, but they didn't come to doors. The animal took one step forward, then another, and Tom saw what it was doing. It was dragging something. A plastic basket, bright blue, the kind people used for laundry or hauling supplies, was hooked in its claws by a strap or frayed cord. Each time the bobcat pulled, the basket lurched an inch or two and scraped the porch with a sound like sandpaper against bone. The basket was scuffed, wet, and heavy enough that the bobcat had to brace its front legs and pull with its shoulders. Tom felt his throat tighten. His skin prickled with a slow crawling awareness that this wasn't a random animal wandering up for warmth. This was intent, purpose. The bobcat stopped again and looked straight at the door, straight at the dark window where Tom stood. Its eyes caught the porch light and flashed a pale, glassy gold. Not wild panic, not hunger, something steadier. Something that made Tom's stomach drop the way it used to when a radio crackled with the words, "Man down" on a fire line. Another gust slammed sleet against the siding. The sound was like handfuls of gravel thrown hard. The Bobcat didn't flinch. It held the blue basket close, almost possessive, and waited. Tom's fingers went numb around the flashlight. He told himself, sensible and flat, that opening the door was a bad decision. He'd seen what claws could do. He'd seen what fear could do. He'd spent enough years around risk to respect it. But then the Bobcat shifted and the strap slid, exposing a corner of what lay inside. Something metallic caught the porch light and glinted, a sharp, clean flash of silver. Tom's chest tightened so fast it stole his breath. That shine. He knew that kind of shine. The thought landed like a stone in deep water, sending a ripple through everything he'd kept buried for years. He unlocked the deadbolt anyway. The click sounded loud in the night, louder than the wind, louder than the sleet. He opened the door just a few inches at first, and cold air poured in like a living thing, smelling of ice and wet earth. The Bobcat didn't bolt. It didn't snarl. It simply backed up one step, as if giving him room, then fixed him with that steady stare again. Tom stepped onto the porch. The boards were slick, and the cold bit through his socks immediately. He kept the flashlight low, not pointed at the animal's face. He remembered enough to know you didn't challenge a wild creature unless you wanted it to choose fight. The Bobcat nudged the blue basket forward with a short, forceful shove. It wasn't begging, it wasn't stealing, it was delivering. Tom swallowed hard. His mind, for reasons he couldn't explain, flashed to practical things older men worried about when they lived alone: insurance claims, property damage, liability, medical bills that could wreck you if you were careless. He pushed those thoughts aside. None of that mattered if what he suspected was true. The Bobcat's breath came out in short, visible bursts, white in the porch light. Its fur was clumped with mud, and one flank looked darker, wet in a way that wasn't just rain. The animal's paws were scraped raw, pads reddened as if it had been running hard over rock and ice. Tom crouched, slow, feeling every joint in his knees complain, and reached toward the basket. The Bobcat didn't move. It just watched him, unblinking, as if the entire night balanced on what he would do next. Tom's fingers touched the rim of the blue plastic. It was cold and slick, trembling slightly from the wind. He lifted the edge enough to see inside. And in that first glimpse, before he even understood what it meant, something in his chest broke open, sharp and aching, like an old wound ripped clean. Because he recognized what was in that basket. And it was impossible. Tom lifted the rim of the blue basket a little higher, and the porch light poured into it like a spotlight. The plastic inside was wet and slick, and the smell that rose out wasn't just rainwater. It had that coppery bite of blood, thin but unmistakable, the way it catches in the back of your throat before your mind wants to admit what your nose already knows. Something metallic lay against the bottom. He reached in with 2 fingers, careful, like the whole thing might be a trap, and pinched it up. A wedding ring, not a cheap one either. Solid, plain, the kind a man wears every day until the gold goes soft at the edges. It was smeared with grime and streaked with dried reddish brown. Tom's breath hitched so hard it hurt. He rubbed it with his thumb, and the porch light flashed across the engraving. LB. For a second, he couldn't hear the storm. He couldn't feel the cold. All he could see was his brother's hand, years ago, turning that same ring in nervous circles at Thanksgiving, the year before everything went wrong between them. Luke Bennett. Luke who had stopped calling. Luke who had vanished into the mountains a week ago, according to the rumor Tom tried not to listen to. Luke who Tom had told, in anger, not to come back unless he was ready to grow up. Words that sounded clever at the time and cruel every time afterward. Tom's eyes burned. The ring trembled between his fingers as if it had its own pulse. Under it was a folded scrap of paper, softened by moisture, darkened at the creases. He unfolded it carefully. The paper stuck slightly, the way wet paper does, and when it opened, a smear of blood came off on his fingertip. The handwriting was rough, rushed, not printed neat, not calm. A man writing with a shaking hand. "He's alive. Don't call them first. Follow her." Tom stared until the words blurred. His throat tightened, and a sound escaped him, half laugh, half choke, because it was so absurd he almost couldn't bear it. Follow her, as if a bobcat were a neighbor knocking to borrow sugar, as if any of this made sense. Then he saw the third item wedged in the corner, a handheld GPS unit, the kind hikers and researchers used when cell service dropped out. The screen was cracked like a spider web, but a dull green glow still pulsed beneath it. A set of coordinates flickered, stubbornly alive. Tom swallowed and glanced back into the kitchen where his phone sat on the counter. He could call 911. He could do the responsible thing. He could let the county handle it, let the system take over, let the forms and procedures and radios do what they did. He'd spent enough years paying attention to homeowners' insurance and emergency response to know how quickly a situation could turn into paperwork, into questions of liability, into who went where and when. But the note didn't say, "Don't call for help." It said, "Don't call them first." His skin prickled. Who was them? Search and rescue? The sheriff's office? Or someone else, someone who shouldn't hear about those coordinates? A gust shoved sleet under the porch roof. It stung his cheeks like tiny needles. The bobcat remained perfectly still, chest rising fast, eyes locked on him. Up close, Tom could see the animal's whiskers beaded with ice, the dark smudge along its side where rainwater had turned pink. One paw looked raw, the pad scraped as if it had run hard over rock. It wasn't here for food. It wasn't here because it was lost. It was here because it had chosen him. Tom's mind flashed to the motion light and the little wireless security camera mounted above his door. If he pulled the footage later, he'd probably see the whole thing. A wild animal dragging a basket across his porch like a delivery. No one would believe it. Not without proof. Not without the ring in his palm. His hand closed around the ring, warm now from his skin. He folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket like it could blow away. He picked up the GPS, feeling the sharp edge of cracked glass bite his thumb. The coordinates blinked again, steady and cruel. Tom looked back at the bobcat. The animal turned, stepped to the edge of the porch, and paused, just long enough to make sure he was watching, then glanced over its shoulder into the black trees. It wasn't running. It was waiting. Tom stepped inside, boots and jacket forgotten by the door for months suddenly necessary. The old first aid kit suddenly too small for whatever this night was about to demand. His hands moved on their own, boots, coat, flashlight, rope, the battered kit. The kind of quick preparation you learn when you've lived long enough to know you don't get many second chances. When he opened the door again, the cold hit him like a slap. The bobcat stood at the bottom step, ears sharp against the storm, and the blue basket sat behind it like a marker left on purpose. Tom took one last breath, tasting ice and pine, and something like fear. Then he followed. The woods swallowed the porch light the moment Tom stepped. Off his steps. The storm had polished every leaf and rock into something slick, and the sleet made a thin, gritty crust that crackled under his boots like crushed glass. Ahead of him, the bobcat moved without hurry, a low shadow slipping between rhododendron and pine, pausing just often enough to make sure he was still there. Every time the wind shifted, it brought a sharp scent of wet bark and cold stone. And somewhere deeper in the trees, water ran fast, swollen and loud. Tom kept the cracked GPS in one hand, the old flashlight in the other. The coordinates glowed a sickly green, blinking like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The wedding ring sat in his pocket, heavy as guilt. He could feel it tapping against his ribs when he walked, like a quiet reminder that this night wasn't a dream. He told himself again to call for help. That was what a sensible man did. But sensible didn't explain the note. Sensible didn't explain how a wild animal knew his door. And sensible didn't erase the picture that kept flashing in his mind. Luke out there somewhere, bleeding, alone, turning that ring in his fingers the way he used to when he was worried. Tom had spent enough years watching neighbors lose everything to one bad night to know how quickly panic turned into problems. Medical bills that snowballed, claims and paperwork, arguments over who was responsible. He'd heard men mutter about home insurance and life insurance like prayers. He'd heard widows whisper about an attorney as if the word itself could keep the lights on. None of that mattered if Luke didn't make it to sunrise. A beam of light cut through the trees. Tom froze. The Bobcat dropped low and slid behind a fallen log, its ears just visible against the dark. The beam swung again, too steady to be lightning, too deliberate to be the moon. A vehicle door slammed somewhere down the trail, a blunt sound that carried. Then came the crunch of tires on ice and the distant grind of gravel. A county cruiser. Close. Tom's stomach tightened. He took 2 steps back off the path, instinctively, the way he used to step out of the way when a fire engine pushed through smoke. The light found him anyway and pinned him in a pale cone. "Tom Bennett?" a woman's voice called, sharp and certain. "Tom, don't move." He lifted his empty hand slowly. The flashlight dangled from his fingers, pointed down. The air tasted like metal. Deputy Rachel King stepped into view, rain hood up, uniform darkened by sleet. Her cheeks were pink from cold, and her eyes were alert in that hard professional way that said she'd already made up her mind about what she was seeing. Behind her, the cruiser's headlights washed the trees in harsh white, throwing long shadows across the trail. "What are you doing out here?" she demanded, coming closer. Her radio hissed with static at her shoulder. "We've got a search going for Luke Bennett. You heard about that?" Tom's jaw clenched at hearing Luke's name out loud. He nodded once. "I did." Rachel's gaze dropped to the GPS in his hand, then to the rope slung over his shoulder, then back to his face. "Are you heading into the woods by yourself in this weather?" Tom felt the note in his pocket like it was burning through the cloth. He forced his voice to stay steady. "I'm not exactly by myself." Rachel followed his eyes into the darkness. "What does that mean?" Before Tom could answer, the Bobcat stepped out from behind the log, just far enough for the headlight to catch the wet sheen of its fur. Rachel's hand snapped to her belt, not quite drawing, but close. "Good Lord," she breathed. "Tom, get behind me, now." "It's not here to hurt anyone," Tom said, and even as he spoke, he knew how insane it sounded. "It brought me something." Rachel stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "A Bobcat brought you something." Tom swallowed. The sleet pattered on Rachel's hood, a steady ticking like a clock. The Bobcat didn't move, didn't bristle, didn't bolt. It watched them both, calm as a judge. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "If you know anything about Luke, you tell me. We're not playing games tonight." Tom could have handed her the note. He could have said the words out loud, but the line "don't call them first" rang in his ears, and he couldn't shake the feeling that saying too much to the wrong person could cost Luke the last thin chance he had. "I got a lead," Tom said carefully, "and it's fresh." Rachel's breath fogged in the light. "A lead from that animal?" Tom met her stare. "Time matters." For a long moment, Rachel didn't move. The radio crackled again, and a voice broke through, distorted and urgent, calling her name. Rachel turned her head to listen, then looked back at Tom, weighing him. "Fine," she said at last, voice clipped. "You don't go another step without me. I'm not letting you disappear out here. If this turns into a rescue, I need to be able to justify every decision I make. The bobcat took one step deeper into the trees, then paused, looking back as if to ask, "Are we done talking?" Tom's heart thudded in his chest. Rachel tightened her grip on her flashlight. "Lead the way," she muttered, not sure who she was talking to, Tom or the wild animal waiting in the dark. They moved in a strange little line through the sleet, Bobcat first, then Tom, then Deputy Rachel King, with her light sweeping in slow, deliberate arcs. The beam turned the wet woods into a world of sharp contrasts: black tree trunks, silver rain, and leaves the color of dark bottle glass. Every few steps, the ice underfoot gave a soft crunch, and when the wind gusted, the branches hissed like whispered warnings. Tom kept his breathing quiet, listening for anything that didn't belong. Rachel's boots were louder than his, the steady thud of someone used to pavement more than ridge trails. But she didn't complain, not once. Her jaw was set, and her eyes tracked every movement the animal made, waiting for the moment it would prove Tom wrong. The bobcat stopped beside a low thicket and pawed at the ground. Tom crouched, the cold seeping through his jeans, and swept the light over the leaves. There, half buried under wet laurel, was a strip of neon fabric. Bright orange, like a warning flag. He lifted it and felt the stiff, soaked cloth in his fingers. "Search vest," Rachel said, her voice tightening. "That's Luke's color." Tom's stomach rolled. The fabric smelled like sweat and rain, and something faintly chemical, like antiseptic rubbed into skin. Fresh. The bobcat moved again, padding downhill toward a stream. Water roared nearby, swollen from the storm, a constant low thunder that made it hard to hear anything else. At the bank, the animal paused and looked back, eyes flashing in the light. Tom stepped closer and saw what it wanted him to see. A smear on a flat rock, dark, glossy, the color of old rust. Blood. The cold air sharpened the scent until it felt metallic on his tongue. He dragged the beam lower and found a second smear, then a third, spaced like the stagger of someone trying to stay upright. Rachel's breath hitched. "Okay," she whispered, and for the first time her voice lost its edge. "Okay, that's real." Tom didn't answer. He was counting. The way he used to count steps in smoke, the way you count when you're trying not to panic. The bobcat led them along the stream, then up a narrow cut in the hillside where mud sucked at their boots. The GPS glowed in Tom's hand, the coordinates pulling them like a magnet. Then the bobcat stopped so abruptly, Rachel almost walked into Tom's back. It lowered its head and sniffed the ground. Its ears flicked. The animal's whole body tightened like a spring. Tom followed its gaze and saw something that didn't belong in this place. A steel trap. It lay half-hidden beneath leaves and wet moss, the jaws open, wicked and clean. A chain ran from it to a stake driven deep into the earth. Tom's heart lurched. He'd seen these before, back when he fought fires and found illegal snares in the aftermath. The kind of thing that didn't just catch animals. It tore them. Rachel cursed under her breath. "That's not supposed to be here." Tom knelt, close enough to see a smear of fresh blood along the trap's teeth. His pulse hammered. He glanced at the bobcat and noticed under the mud raw scrapes on its paw pads. Not just from running, from struggling. "Someone set this," Rachel said, voice tight with anger now. "Poachers." The word made the woods feel colder. If poachers were active, then Luke's disappearance wasn't just bad luck. It was risk. It was people doing ugly things in the dark. The bobcat let out a low sound. Not a growl, not a yowl. More like a warning in its throat. It stepped around the trap carefully, as if it knew the teeth by memory, and continued on. Tom rose, his knees aching, and his mind raced with practical fears. Not just for Luke, for what came after, for investigations, for reports, for the kind of legal mess that could drag on for months and drain a man dry. He'd watched neighbors get swallowed by court dates and insurance disputes, watched the words personal injury and liability turn into nightmares. He shook the thoughts away. Luke first, everything else later. The trail climbed. The sleet eased into cold rain, and the rain made the world smell darker. Wet soil, pine resin, the faint sour scent of rot beneath leaves. The Bobcat led them toward a ridge where the trees thinned. Tom's hands went numb around the flashlight. Rachel kept her radio volume low, as if afraid sound might carry. Then, from somewhere ahead, came a sharp crack. Not thunder, a gunshot. The sound snapped through the woods, clean and terrifying, and for a split second everything went still. Tom's breath, Rachel's stride, even the rain. Rachel's eyes widened, and her hand went to her belt again, this time without hesitation. Tom felt his heart drop into his gut. The note in his pocket seemed to press against him like a warning. Don't call them first. Because maybe them wasn't the sheriff's office at all. Maybe them was whoever was out here right now, watching. The Bobcat didn't run. It flattened low and slipped forward, silent as smoke, heading straight into the darkness where the sound had come from. Rachel leaned close to Tom, her voice barely there. "If your lead just got a shot at Bennett." Tom swallowed, tasting fear like pennies. "We keep moving," he said, and he hated how desperate he sounded. Rachel lifted her flashlight, but the beam shook just slightly now. The rain ran down her chin, cold and steady. Somewhere ahead, something else cracked, this time a branch, close, too close, followed by the faint sweep of a distant light between trees. They weren't alone anymore. They didn't speak after the gunshot. Words felt too loud, too bright in the dark, like striking a match in a room full of fumes. They moved with the rain sliding down their collars and the cold creeping into their fingers, following the Bobcat's low, steady shape as it threaded through the trees. The woods changed as they climbed. The ground went from soft leaf mold to slick clay, and every step threatened to slide out from under them. The air smelled sharper up here, pine pitch and wet stone, with a faint tang of smoke that might have been someone's campfire, or might have been imagination fed by fear. Tom kept glancing back, sure he'd see a light between trunks again. Once he did. A thin, pale sweep far behind them, then gone, as if whoever carried it knew exactly how to hide it. Rachel saw it too. Her shoulders tightened, and she lowered her voice to a rough whisper. "We're being tracked." Tom didn't deny it. His mouth had gone dry, and every swallow tasted like cold metal. He tightened his grip on the rope, feeling the frayed fibers bite his palm. He'd learned long ago that when things went bad, you held on to what you could: tools, signals, each other. Ahead, the Bobcat stopped at the edge of a narrow cut in the hillside. The rainwater had turned the path into a shiny ribbon. Below, blackness dropped away into a ravine where the stream roared louder, hidden under rocks. The sound was constant, a deep, heavy rush like a freight train in the distance. Tom stepped closer and felt his boot slide half an inch. His stomach lurched. The beam of his flashlight caught a slick root crossing the trail like a trap line. Rachel moved to the side, trying to get a better angle with her light. "Careful," she said, but her voice came a second too late. The ground gave, not all at once, just enough. Tom's foot skated, his body pitched sideways, and the world tilted. He grabbed for a sapling and caught nothing but wet leaves. For a heartbeat, he was weightless. Then his shoulders slammed into the slope, hard enough to spark pain down his arm, and he slid. Mud filled his mouth. Cold water soaked through his jeans. He heard Rachel shout his name, muffled by the roar of the creek, and then a sharp snap, his flashlight hitting rock. The beam spun wildly, cutting dizzy circles through rain. Tom dug his fingers into the clay and felt it crumble. The panic rose fast, hot in his chest, the old fear of losing control. He tasted blood where he'd bitten his tongue. Then something caught his jacket, Rachel's hand, strong and sure, locking around the collar. "Don't you let go," she growled, leaning back with her boots braced. Her face was tight with effort, rain streaking down her cheeks like tears she didn't have time for. Tom's shoulders screamed. He forced his body toward the trail, inch by inch, mud dragging at him like hands. Rachel hauled, her breath coming in harsh bursts. The strap of the rope bit into Tom's ribs. And through it all, the Bobcat stood on the safe side of the path, ears upright, watching with an eerie stillness, like it had seen men fall before, like it understood what gravity did to flesh and bone. Tom's knee finally cleared the lip. Rachel yanked him up onto the trail, and he collapsed on his hands and knees, coughing muddy water. The cold air stabbed his lungs. Pain pulsed in his shoulder, deep and throbbing, and when he looked down, he saw a dark patch spreading on his sleeve, blood warm against the icy rain. Rachel crouched beside him, eyes scanning the trees even as she checked his arm. "You hurt bad?" "It's just a scrape," Tom lied, though the ache said otherwise. He'd had worse. Fire did that. Life did that. Rachel pulled a small packet from her kit, gauze and tape, quick, practiced. The sound of the tape ripping was strangely loud, a brittle tear in the storm. She wrapped his shoulder tight. The pressure stung, but it steadied him. They moved again, slower now. Tom's muscles trembled with cold and adrenaline. A few minutes later, the Bobcat led them under a slanted rock outcrop where the rain thinned to a soft drip. The place smelled of damp earth and old moss, sheltered and dark. It was the first pocket of quiet they'd had all night. Rachel clicked her light off for a moment, and the darkness wrapped around them like a blanket. The stream still roared, but it felt farther away. Tom's heartbeat sounded too loud in his own ears. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Even in the dim, it caught a faint glimmer from Rachel's watch face. The gold looked warmer than anything else in the world. Rachel's voice softened, just a fraction. "That's Luke's?" Tom nodded, unable to trust his throat. He rolled the ring between his fingers, feeling the smooth edge, the tiny scratches from years of work. He saw Luke's hands again, hands that used to fix engines, hands that never stopped moving. "I shouldn't even have this," Tom said quietly. The words came out rough, like they'd scraped his ribs on the way up. "I shouldn't be the one out here." Rachel studied him in the dark. "Why?" Tom stared at the ring until his eyes burned. "Because the last time I saw him, I told him not to come back." He swallowed hard, the taste of mud and regret. And he didn't. For a long moment, Rachel said nothing. The rain dripped steadily off the rock, slow and patient. Tom felt the weight of years pressing down on him, heavier than the storm, heavier than the rope. He thought of all the practical things men his age worry about: retirement accounts, home value, health coverage, the cost of an ambulance ride, the kind of life insurance talk people avoid until it's too late. None of it mattered if the person you needed forgiveness from never came home. Rachel finally spoke, voice low. "Then let's make sure he does." Outside their shelter, the Bobcat shifted, paws scraping stone with a soft, gritty sound. It looked back at them once, its eyes faintly reflecting what little light remained, and Tom felt it like a pull in his chest. Time was moving, Luke was bleeding, and somewhere out there in the wet black woods, a stranger's light had already found their trail. The climb out of that rocky shelter felt steeper than it should have. Tom's shoulder throbbed with every step, a deep, pulsing ache that spread into his neck, and the cold made his joints feel older than they were. The rain had eased into a fine, needling mist, and the world carried that washed, clean smell of wet pine and clay, fresh on the surface, rotten underneath. The Bobcat led them along a faint service path, barely more than a line of crushed leaves, and then the trees thinned. Ahead, the shape of a building rose out of the dark, like a memory that refused to die. An old ranger station, its roof sagged in the middle, and one shutter hung crooked, tapping softly in the wind. The porch steps were slick with algae, the wood stained a deep black green. Tom felt a small chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He knew this place. Years ago, when he still took call-outs and trained volunteer crews, he'd stood right here teaching men how to tie rescue knots in the rain. Rachel kept her light moving. The beam slid over a broken window, caught on a spider web glittering with water, then swept the tree line. "This isn't on my map," she muttered. "It used to be," Tom said. His voice came out low, almost reverent, before they shut it down. The Bobcat stopped at the bottom step and looked back as if to say, "Here, now." Tom climbed onto the porch carefully. The boards gave a soft groan, not loud, but the kind of sound that made you imagine the whole structure collapsing under you. The air smelled like soaked wood and old dust, a damp, stale scent that reminded him of basements and closed-up attics. Rachel followed, her hand near her radio, her eyes narrowed. Inside, the station was a shadowy box. Their lights caught the outlines of a desk, a fallen chair, a bulletin board warped by moisture. Paper scraps still clung to it like dead leaves. Tom's flashlight landed on a faded flyer, curled at the corners. Wildlife Rehab Hotline. Under it, in smudged marker, someone had written numbers that were no longer readable. Rachel stepped closer. "Why would a Bobcat bring us here?" Tom didn't answer at first. His throat had gone tight again because his light had found something else, an old sign-in sheet pinned beneath the flyer. The ink had bled from years of humidity, but one name was still clear enough to punch him in the chest. Tom Bennett, Rescue Rigging Training. Rachel leaned in, reading it, then looked up sharply. "That's you." Tom felt the hair rise on his arms. The coincidence was too clean to be chance. The animal had not just wandered to any cabin. It had led them to a place that connected to him, a place where someone once knew he could pull people out of trouble. It made his skin prickle with the same uneasy sensation he'd had when he first saw the blue basket. Purpose. Rachel's skepticism wavered, and in her eyes he saw something new. Respect mixed with fear. "You're telling me that animal knew to find you," she said, voice barely above the soft drip of water from the ceiling. "I'm telling you," Tom said, "it found my door." The Bobcat padded into the station, quiet as breath, and paused near the desk. It sniffed the air, then moved toward the back room where a door hung half open. Rachel raised her light, and Tom followed, stepping around broken glass. In the back room, the temperature dropped. The air was colder still. Their beams found a small pile on the floor, a torn canvas pack, a crushed energy bar wrapper, and a notebook swollen with water. Tom crouched and picked the notebook up. The cover stuck to his palm. When he opened it, the pages were damp, but not completely ruined. One name was written inside the front cover in neat, careful letters. Dr. Maya Reed. Rachel exhaled slowly. "That's the biologist," she said. "The one the county said might be out here tagging wildlife. She's been missing too." Tom's mouth went dry. Missing wasn't a word that meant one thing. Missing could mean alive and waiting, or it could mean cold and still. The Bobcat made a small sound in its throat and pressed forward, pushing past the door into the hallway. Tom followed, and his flashlight landed on something that twisted his gut. A fresh boot print in mud right across the old boards, not theirs. Beside it, a smear of something dark on the wall. The color was almost black in the dim, but Tom knew that shade. Dried blood. Rachel's posture changed instantly. She straightened, listening. The station suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Her hand went to her radio, then stopped, as if she remembered the note Tom hadn't shown her. "Tom," she whispered, "if someone else is out here." A faint sound answered her. A creak. Slow. Deliberate, like a foot testing a porch step outside. Tom's pulse jumped. The misty rain hissed against the windows, and somewhere close, a branch scraped the siding. He could smell wet wool and gun oil now, sharp, human. The Bobcat froze, ears angled toward the front room. Its body went low, ready, not to attack, but to move. Rachel clicked her flashlight off and leaned close, her breath warm against Tom's ear. "We don't know who that is," she breathed, "and I don't like surprises." Tom's mind flashed to the practical nightmares that followed violence. Police reports, court hearings, the kind of legal trouble that made people call an attorney before they called their own family. But none of that mattered if Luke was bleeding out somewhere while a stranger with a gun walked up on them. The floor creaked again, closer now. Tom tightened his grip on the flashlight, feeling the cold metal bite into his skin. In the dark, the Bobcat slipped toward the back exit like it had done this before, and Tom realized, with a slow, sick certainty, that the note hadn't been paranoia. It had been a warning. They slipped out the back the way the Bobcat showed them, through a warped door that sighed on rusty hinges and into a narrow strip of trees where the mist hung low like breath. Behind them, the ranger station groaned once, and then a faint beam of light swept across a broken window, searching. Rachel held her radio close but didn't key it. Tom could feel the note still hidden in his pocket like a stone, and the silence between them had weight now. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits on your tongue and tastes like pennies. The Bobcat moved fast but not reckless. It kept a shadow, hugging the darker trunks, avoiding open ground, the way a person avoids a lit window at night. Tom followed, shoulder burning, boots sucking at mud. Rachel stayed close, her breathing controlled, but Tom could hear the tightness in it. Shorter inhales, quicker exhales, the rhythm of someone trying not to let panic take the wheel. The GPS blinked in Tom's hand. The numbers didn't mean much to him without a map, but the direction did. It pulled them toward a ridge where the trees grew sparse and the ground turned stony. The rain here felt colder, sharper. Each droplet stung his cheeks and ran down into the collar of his coat, making his skin crawl. Then they smelled it. Oil. Old metal. The sour bite of something that had been trapped underground too long. The Bobcat slowed at a cut in the hillside where the earth had collapsed inward. The opening was half hidden by briars and a tangle of fallen limbs, but once Tom's flashlight found it, there was no mistaking what it was. An old mine mouth. The entrance yawned black, framed by timbers stained almost blue with age and damp. Water dripped from the beams in slow, steady taps that sounded like a clock counting down. The air rolling out of the hole was cold and stale, carrying a faint smoky odor that made Tom's stomach knot. Somewhere inside, something scraped, stone on stone, followed by a dull thump. Rachel lifted her light, and the beam disappeared into the darkness like it had been swallowed. "Oh no," she whispered. Tom's heart hammered. "Luke," he called, not loud, but loud enough to hurt his own throat. "Luke, it's Tom." Silence answered at first. Then, faint as a dying radio signal, came a sound. 3 uneven knocks. Not from outside, from within. Tom's knees went weak. He swallowed hard, tasting mud and relief and terror all at once. "He's in there," he said, voice breaking despite himself. Rachel's face tightened. She scanned the ridge line behind them, then the woods. "We're exposed," she muttered. "If that guy followed us—" A small sound cut her off. The bobcat slipped forward and stopped at the mine's edge. It sniffed, then stepped into the shadows just far enough that its body vanished except for the pale flash of its eyes. A heartbeat later it reappeared, backing out, and began pawing at the ground near a pile of rock and debris. Not random scratching, firm, repeated, like it was pointing. Tom stepped closer and aimed his light. The rocks were loose, recently shifted. He could see a narrow gap between them, a seam where air moved, a trapped person's breath. "He's behind that," Tom said. Rachel's voice went tight. "Tom, we need more people, equipment. This is a confined space rescue." Tom's mind flashed. Training days, rope systems, leverage, the dull ache in his hands after hauling someone up a ravine. He didn't have proper gear. He didn't have a team. He had an old rope, a first aid kit, and a storm that wasn't waiting on paperwork. "If we wait," Tom said, "he bleeds out." Rachel hesitated, jaw clenched, weighing policy against a man's life. Tom could almost see the invisible ledger in her head. Procedure, risk, liability. The kind of decisions that later turned into reports and hearings, and if things went wrong, the sort of legal trouble that made people whisper about a lawsuit or call a personal injury attorney. But in the end, Rachel's eyes hardened. "Okay," she said. "We do it smart. Fast." Tom looped the rope around a thick pine and braced it, building a rough anchor the way he'd taught kids at the volunteer station years ago. Rachel kept her light trained on the tree line, listening. The rain kept falling, patient and relentless, soaking their sleeves, making everything slippery. Tom wedged a long branch under a rock and leaned his weight into it. The wood creaked, the rock shifted a hair. He leaned again, shoulders screaming, hands shaking with effort. Cold mud smeared his knuckles. The rock finally rolled, heavy and reluctant, exposing a wider gap. A breath, ragged, wet, came through. "Luke!" Tom called again, lower now, closer. A voice answered, thin and hoarse. "Tom?" Hearing it felt like being hit. Tom's eyes stung. "Yeah," he rasped. "Yeah, it's me. Don't talk. Just hold on." Rachel crouched and shone her light into the gap. Her face went pale. "There's someone else," she said. Tom's stomach dropped. "Who?" Rachel swallowed. "A woman. She's not responding." Tom's flashlight caught the edge of a sleeve deeper inside, dark, soaked, motionless. His throat went tight. The bobcat pressed close, breathing fast, its whiskers trembling. In that moment, Tom understood something with a clarity that hurt. The animal hadn't dragged that basket for attention. It had dragged it because it couldn't drag two grown people out of a collapsing mine. So, it had dragged the only thing it could. A message. A plea. And it had brought it to the one door it believed might open. Tom didn't remember deciding to go in. He only remembered the feel of cold stone under his palms and the smell. Wet earth, rusted iron, and something sour that warned of bad air. He slid through the gap shoulder first, teeth clenched against the pane, and the mind swallowed the flashlight beam until it felt like a thin thread in a huge, dark throat. "Luke," he whispered, following the sound of breathing. The bobcat didn't follow. It couldn't. It stayed at the mouth, a low shape against the rain, eyes reflecting light like two small coins. Watching, waiting. Inside, the ground sloped and glittered with water. The timbers overhead were black and swollen, and each drip landed with a soft plunk that sounded too loud. Tom crawled to where the light caught a boot, then a leg twisted at an angle that made his stomach turn. Luke lay wedged between rock and a broken beam, face gray, lips tinged blue from cold. His eyes opened halfway when Tom reached him, and when he tried to speak, only a wet rasp came out. "Don't," Tom said quickly, voice shaking. "Could save it." Luke's hand moved, slow and weak, toward Tom's pocket, as if he knew the ring wasn't there anymore. Tom took Luke's cold fingers in both of his hands, pressing warmth into them, the way you press a prayer into your own chest when you don't have anything else. Behind Luke, deeper in the shadow, lay a woman, motionless, half-curled on her side. Her hair was dark against the stone, and her jacket was soaked through. Tom aimed the light and saw a name stitched on the chest in neat white letters. Maya. Rachel's voice echoed faintly from outside. "Tom, talk to me." Tom swallowed hard and crawled toward the woman. Her skin was icy under his fingertips. He leaned close to her mouth and felt the faintest whisper of breath against his knuckle. Alive, barely. "We get her out first," Tom called back, forcing his voice steady. "She's alive." Luke made a small, desperate sound. Tom shook his head. "I'm not leaving you," he said, softer now. "Not again." A rumble shivered through the mine. Fine grit sifted down like dirty snow. Tom froze. The timbers above groaned, a long, sick wooden moan. "Collapse risk," Rachel shouted from outside, voice tight with urgency. "Tom, move!" Tom's mind snapped into the old mode, the one he'd lived in when fire rolled fast and men had seconds to choose. He looped the rope around Maya's shoulders, careful not to choke her, and tugged twice. Signal. Rachel pulled from the mouth, and Maya's body slid inch by inch toward the light, her boots dragging through shallow water. Another rumble. Another shower of grit. The mine smelled suddenly sharper, like struck rock. Luke's eyes widened. He fought to lift his hand and pressed something into Tom's palm. A folded scrap, damp and stiff. Tom opened it with shaking fingers. The same rough handwriting. "She saved her. She came for me." Tom stared, confused, until Luke's gaze flicked toward the mine mouth where the Bobcat waited. "She," Tom whispered, throat closing. "You mean her?" Luke blinked once, slow. Tears cut clean tracks down the dirt on his cheeks. Tom shoved the note into his pocket and grabbed Luke under the arms. "You're coming," he said, and pulled. Luke cried out, the sound raw and human, and Tom felt it in his own bones. He hauled again, inching him toward the gap, the water soaking his sleeves, his shoulders screaming like a live wire. Outside, Rachel had Maya halfway out. The rain hit Tom's face when he finally reached the mouth, cold and stinging, and for a split second the night air felt like the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. Then a shadow moved at the edge of the trees. A man stepped into the spill of the cruiser's distant light, hood up, rifle slung low. His beam swept the mine entrance, then locked on the scene, Rachel dragging a woman, Tom hauling Luke. "Evening," the man called, voice calm in a way that raised every hair on Tom's arms. "You folks shouldn't be here." Rachel's stance changed. She planted her feet, hand on her weapon. "Sheriff's office, drop the rifle." The man laughed once, short and sharp. "Sheriff's office, out here, with no backup?" His light flicked to the Bobcat, then to the ground near the trap marks. "That cat's been a problem. I'm fixing it." The Bobcat flattened, ears back, but didn't run. Tom's throat went dry. He thought of everything that could follow a night like this: reports, investigations, legal fees, the kind of mess that made people call a criminal defense attorney or spend months in court. He didn't care, not right now. Rachel raised her voice. "Step back!" The man lifted his rifle slightly, and the Bobcat moved. It didn't charge him. It charged the blue basket. It darted to the side of the mine entrance where the basket sat. Yes, it had dragged it this far too, and hooked the strap with its claws. With a force that looked impossible from an animal already bleeding, it yanked the basket into the open, right under the man's light. Something inside clinked. The man's gaze snapped down, greedy and sharp. He took one step forward without thinking. In that step, his boot landed on the slick root Tom had nearly fallen on earlier. His foot shot out. He stumbled hard, arms flailing. The rifle swung wide and fired. The shot cracked the night like lightning, deafening. Bark exploded off a tree trunk inches from Rachel's shoulder. Rachel didn't hesitate. She surged forward, kicked the rifle away, and slammed the man face first into the mud with a force that made him grunt. Her cuffs snapped shut with a metallic click that sounded to Tom like justice. Tom hauled Luke the last few feet into the rain. Luke collapsed, gasping, and Rachel pulled her radio up at last, thumb pressing the button. "Officer down. No. Suspect detained," she barked. "Need medical now. 2 patients. Location?" Static answered. Then a voice, distant but real. Tom's knees finally gave. He sat in the mud beside Luke, rain washing dirt off their faces in thin rivers. He pulled the ring from his pocket and pressed it into Luke's palm. "I'm sorry," Tom said, the words tearing out of him like something he'd held too long. "I'm sorry I said what I said." Luke's fingers closed around the ring, weak but certain. He didn't speak. He just squeezed once, and that small pressure shattered something in Tom. He bowed his head and cried, silent and shaking, rain mixing with tears until he couldn't tell one from the other. Nearby, Maya coughed and opened her eyes, unfocused at first. She turned her head toward the Bobcat, and even in pain, her face softened. "Blue Basket," she whispered, like it was a name. Tom looked for the Bobcat, and his heart sank. The animal stood a few yards away, body trembling. A dark line of blood cut through its fur, and its breath came fast, ragged, visible in the cold air. It took one step, then another, as if it wanted to come closer, then stopped. Its eyes met Tom's. In that gaze, Tom saw something he never expected to see in a wild creature. Not fear, not aggression, recognition. Tom reached out a hand, slow, respectful. "You did it," he whispered. "You got us here." The Bobcat's ears flicked. For a moment it stayed, balanced between the woods and the porch lights of a world it didn't belong to. Then, as distant sirens began to wail somewhere far down the mountain road, the Bobcat turned. It limped into the trees, swallowed by black trunks and mist, the blue basket left behind in the mud like an offering. Weeks later, after Luke was stitched up and Maya recovered, Tom went back to that ranger station in daylight. The woods looked different without the storm, greens softer, sunlight pale and honeyed through bare branches, the air smelling of pine needles warming and clean earth. He hammered a small wooden sign onto the old bulletin board where his name still faintly showed through water stains. "Blue Basket. Thank you." He didn't add anything else. No speeches, no explanations, just gratitude, plain as a hand on a shoulder. That night, he mounted a small trail camera across from it, the kind folks use for property security and peace of mind. The first time he checked the footage, his hands trembled. At 2:13 a.m., a familiar shape stepped into view. A bobcat, thinner now, moving with a careful limp. It stopped in front of the sign and stared at it for a long, quiet moment. Then it turned its head slightly, as if listening to the woods, and disappeared into the dark, without a sound. If you've ever wondered whether mercy can cross the line between wild and human, remember this. Sometimes it arrives on your porch in the middle of a storm, dragging a blue basket, asking you to be brave. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.